again, I'm Andrew here, and welcome to another episode of The Art of Business English. This week, we have a special episode on how to go through an effective decision-making process. So if you're like me, you have to make a lot of decisions at work, and many of these are in the form of problem solving. So if you find yourself frustrated by a lack of effective problem solving and decision making procedures at work, then you won't want to miss this episode. So, as with most things, decision making and problem solving are skills, and these can be learnt over time. So if you have the right process to follow, then you can make your problem solving and decision making much more effective and rewarding. So in today's episode, we will be looking at the following: the decision-making process, some common decision-making language, and final tips on how to implement the decision-making process in your organization. So let's kick things off by going over the decision-making process. Well, the decision-making process. So the first step in the decision-making process is the definition of the outcome or objective, okay? It is crucial that we understand what we want to achieve at the end of the process. So our conclusion will guide us along the path to making the most appropriate decision. This may seem obvious, and you may be thinking, Andrew, you're not telling me anything new here. However, from experience, clearly defining the objective is often overlooked. So this is also true for decision making for problem solving. We must first define the problem and then the desired outcome. So once we have the "we are here" and "this is where we want to be" clear, so I'll just repeat that. Once we have the "we are here" and "this is where we want to be" clear, it's much easier to connect the dots. So if you're working in a group, then this should be brainstormed together and written up on a whiteboard. If you're working alone, then you should write down your desired outcomes. And if you have the time, leave it for a few hours, okay? That's also important. Or until the next day, if possible, so that you can reflect on it, okay? Sometimes trying to work out what your real desired outcome is quite difficult, or more difficult than you think. So if you can have some time to reflect on it, then that should help. So the next step in the process is to collect relevant information. The key word here is relevant. Some people only look at the available information and then make decisions using this, okay? However, when evaluating the information, we need to make sure that we classify it as relevant. If we have available information, but it is irrelevant, then it should be discarded. Nowadays, we have information overload, okay? And this is very common nowadays with many things, with the access to the internet and, a sea of information. And the best decision makers, they are the ones who are able to separate themselves from their decision and from all the noise, okay? So this is a common problem nowadays. We have a lot of noise, which really, it makes us a bit confused about what is relevant information and what is available information, okay? So let's look at the next step of the process. We need to generate all of the feasible options, okay? The most important thing to remember here is that we need to create more than 2 options. We should try and have 3 or 4 options if possible, okay? Many people only spend the time to look at 2 possible outcomes and then they go straight ahead and choose between the 2 alternatives. Now, our objective is not to choose between the good and the bad alternative, okay? That is not what we're here to do. Our objective is to choose the best option, okay? So, for example, if you're recruiting a new person to your company, would you only interview 2 people? No, of course you wouldn't. You would interview a number of people and then work the list down to the best person for the position, okay? So remember, the options that you generate must be closely aligned with your desired outcome. The options must also be practical and feasible, okay? So, as a boss, you should encourage your team to come up with creative and sometimes even crazy ideas. However, when we evaluate these options, they must actually be achievable, okay? So the next part of the process is to make an actual decision, okay? And the best way to go about doing this is the following. You must first have a defined selection criterion. And these criteria should be given some form of priority or weighting, okay? So unless an option meets the essential criteria or priority, then it is discarded, okay? So once all of the options that don't meet the essential criteria are discarded, then you can look at the other criteria, which are non-essential but desired, okay? And you can categorize your criteria into highly desirable and pleasant addition or something like that, okay? So simply put, you can draw 3 circles. At the core of the circle, there is the essential or must-have category. The second circle is the highly desirable, and the third or outer circle, the could or might have category, okay? And with these, we are able to categorize options and then decide. So in case where you need to make more complicated decisions, you can use the following tips to help you narrow down the options, okay? So listing the advantages and disadvantages, okay? Simple, one column advantages and another column disadvantages. You can examine the consequences of each course or each path, okay? So think about all the negative aspects. You can test the proposed course against the measure of your aim or objective, okay? So you can try and think about some way to test the proposed course of action, and this should be tested against your objective or your outcome, okay? And then finally, you can weigh the risks against the expected gains. Sometimes it's okay to take a risk if we know that the gains are far greater, okay? Remember, when assessing the risk, you need to really personally ask yourself the question, can I live with the consequences if this goes badly? Or will it sink me or will it sink the company? Okay, so if the risk is calculated, then you should be able to live with the outcome if it's negative. Okay, so don't risk everything. Make, a very logical and risk-assessed decision. Remember, most decisions have some element of risk associated with them, okay, especially if they're in business. So you just need to make sure that you make calculated risks. All right. Now, the final part, and sometimes the most difficult, is to implement and evaluate. Okay. When implementing a decision, the first step is to make sure you have a general idea of your point of no return, or PNR. So the PNR is the point when the cost or effort of implementing the decision becomes greater than turning back and changing your mind, okay? So this is where evaluation becomes important. When you evaluate the decision and the implementation, you can see if the decision was correct or not, okay? So if you fail to evaluate, you may not realize that you have passed your PNR, or point of no return, and from here the decision to abandon the implementation is often more expensive than continuing. Well, there you have it. That is basically the steps for an overview of the decision-making process. So just to summarize, the following steps should be followed. Okay, there are 5. Define the objective or problem. That's the first step. Collect all the relevant information. Remember, the key word here is relevant information and not necessarily available information. Number 3 is develop the best options, and this should be more than 2, if possible 4 or 5. Number 4, evaluate the options and decide. So number 4 is where we make a decision, but we need to make a calculated decision. Number 5, and the last step, is implement and monitor the consequences once that decision has been taken and implemented. Now, in the next part of the episode, we're going to look at some useful decision-making expressions. So let's look at those now. So decision-making expressions here, I will give you the expression and then the Spanish translation. So the first one, to go with your gut. This is seguir tus instintos. Next one, my instincts tell me. Mis instintos me dicen. Next one, to weigh up your options. To weigh up your options is sospesar tus opciones. Next one is outcome. An outcome is un resultado. Another one, this is an expression for comparing and contrasting. On the one hand and on the other hand. Por un lado, por el otro lado. To rush into something. To rush into something is precipitarse. To jump to conclusions. To jump to conclusions is sacar conclusiones precipitadas. To appreciate one's concerns. To appreciate one's concerns is apreciar tu interés or agradecer tu preocupación. To keep your options open. Mantener tus opciones abiertas. All things considered. All things considered en general, a fin de cuentas. To be up in the air. To be up in the air is tentativo, estar en el aire. So, now you have all the translations, okay? Let's take a look at some example sentences in context. So, I think I will go with my gut instinct on this decision. We don't have time to evaluate all the options. My instinct tells me that the best option would be to cancel the contract and go back to the negotiation table. We are still in the process of weighing up all the options. We don't want to rush the process. We have a clear outcome in mind. That is a key part of this process. On the one hand, I like the first option. However, on the other hand, it seems rather expensive. Now, let's hold our horses. We shouldn't rush into making a decision. Don't jump to conclusions. We still need to get some more relevant data before we move forward. John, I appreciate your concerns, and I think you're right. We need to evaluate the consequences of this decision before we invest more time and money. At the moment, we've decided to keep our options open before we go down a specific route. All things considered, I feel that option A is the way forward. Work is stressful at the moment. I'm not sure if the company will be sold, so I can't decide on my future while everything is up in the air. Right. Well, that brings us to the last part of the episode. I want to quickly look at the implementing decision-making in your organization. So, implementing decision-making in your organization, this can be a little bit difficult, but the first step for implementing decision or effective decision-making in your organization is to be aware of the process, okay? So you can use this episode to guide you. Personally, I feel that decision-making is best done in small groups with key stakeholders in the process. Too many people in a decision-making meeting could lead to no decision being taken, okay? Now, effective decision-making requires you to have all members in the meeting aware of the steps in the process, okay? So once these steps are clear and everyone knows the path, then the brainstorming can start, okay? So this is the best way to start, by defining the outcome and objectives. You'll also need to make sure that the people who prepare data and information are aware that or aware of what is considered relevant, okay? So too much data collection will complicate the process. If you don't have all the information, then you need to collect it and come back another day. be ready to slow the process down, okay? Because often an urgent decision is not as urgent as we think, okay? That's very common. People become quite obsessed with rushing things, and sometimes we should just take our time and make sure we've made the right decision once we have all the relevant information, okay? Once you have the relevant information, then you can brainstorm the options with the team, go on to evaluate and make sure it's clear who is responsible for implementation, okay, and how this process will take place. And finally, someone needs to take ownership of the decision in case things go wrong. There's nothing worse than people trying to blame each other and not reacting to solve negative outcomes of a decision. Okay, so those are my tips on how to implement and manage decision making in your organization. And final thoughts. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode here at the Art of Business English. I hope you found once again this material useful and highly relevant to your daily working life. If you do have any comments you wish to share with me, then don't hesitate to let me know. I love your feedback. And if you found the episode useful, then please share it with your friends and family. I'm sure everyone needs a bit of help with their decision making. And as always, it's been a pleasure having you with me, and I look forward to you again with me, or to having you again next week. And do let me know if you'd like to join me for some free coaching on the AOBE, or if you do have any topics that you would like me to help you with, then just let me know. Reply to the emails I send out. Be more than happy to help. Till next week, guys, take care. Have a great one and enjoy your week. Bye for now.